Welcome, my friends, to the History Maven. Come back with me, my darlings. Let me take you back in time to the year 1971. It was the year that Walt Disney World opened to excited children everywhere. Speaking of kids, children got one of the best Saturday morning cartoons ever, the Jackson 5 debuted. And everybody's favorite glamour girl doll, Malibu Barbie, was introduced to children everywhere. But it wasn't all dolls and cartoons. 1971 was the year that President Nixon ended the gold standard and thus started a slow boil toward an economic decline in the U.S. The unemployment rate peaked at 6.1%, which was doubled from the previous year, and the Pentagon Papers were published. It showed that the U.S. government had been doing some major fibbing to its citizens. Citizens weren't happy already with the Vietnam War, which was raging to much protest. And there were riots in Attica prison. The prisoners were suffering from a lot of unfair treatment, and they rose up against it. 1971 was a year of social unrest in general, and the people were rising up against the establishment. Common folk were desperate for a win, for the little guy, for once. Entered the mysterious Dan Cooper, a.k.a. D.B. Cooper. It was the day before Thanksgiving, and the Portland International Airport was positively bustling with folks eager to get home in time for a slice of Nan's pumpkin pie. A trim man of about 6 feet bought a $20 ticket to Seattle under the name Dan Cooper. He was a quiet, very calm 40-something white male in a dapper black suit. He sat in the lounge area, serenely chain-smoking before the flight. The passengers, including Cooper, boarded the plane, and Cooper sat in seat 18E by the exit door. He lit another smoke. He ordered a bourbon and Coke from flight attendant Florence Schaffner, and nothing seemed amiss. But shortly after the jet engine roared and the wings caught flight, Cooper waved Florence over, and this time he passed her a note. She tucked it in her pocket, figuring he was slipping her his phone number. That happened to her so often that she didn't even glance at the paper. Dan Cooper called her over yet again. Florence was annoyed that this horn dog wouldn't back off, but she dutifully leaned in close to hear his softly spoken words. "Miss, you might want to look at that note. I have a bomb." The attendant unfolded the square of paper. Cooper had written that he had a bomb and he wanted $200,000. No funny business, the note said. He opened his briefcase to show a tangle of wires and what appeared to be dynamite. Florence grabbed the rest of the crew. That was flight attendant Tina Mucklow and Alice Hancock and flight engineer Harold Anderson. They booked it to the cockpit to show the pilot and co-pilot. "What shall we do?" they said. They immediately called the air traffic control, who saw nothing that they could do except for to comply with the hijackers' demands. Florence sat with Cooper while at his request, but for the majority of the flight, the newest member of the crew, a young and devotedly religious Tina Mucklow, bravely tended to Cooper's requests. He told her to sit with him and relay his demands as needed. He had her pass on his demands for 4 parachutes. There were 2 front chutes and 2 back chutes, and he said they have to be from a civilian source. "I don't want any of that military stuff." In Seattle, he promised he would release the passengers and 2 of the flight attendants before they made their way to their intended destination, which was to be Mexico City. He asked that the money that he was getting, the $200,000, be doled out to him as $20 bills totaling 21 pounds, and that they had to have random serial numbers. None of that sequential business, see? The FBI, well, for a moment they actually considered giving Cooper dummy chutes so he'd fall to his death, but because he'd asked for multiple chutes, they thought he might be planning on taking a hostage, and they decided against this action of the fake parachutes. Though one of the parachutes had a reserved chute that was sewn open, and he didn't seem to realize that when he got it. The FBI gave Cooper $20 bills, but they were sneaky. They chose bills that all were from the L series, so that when they came into circulation, banks would be able to identify it and locate Cooper. When the jet landed in Seattle, Cooper, he kept his word. He released the passengers and all of the flight attendants except for Tina Mucklow. Now, the weird thing is the passengers thought there was engine trouble. They were not aware that there was a skyjacking going on. The police were communicating with Mucklow, the flight attendant, when they arrived. Cooper would not allow himself to be seen or heard by the police, so they never saw him. Cooper specified he wanted to fly directly to Mexico, but the pilot said, "We're going to have to stop in Reno for refueling. The plane will fall out of the sky if we keep going without some petrol." In Reno, he complained, "This is taking too long. This refueling shouldn't take this long." But it was a normal amount of time. So this made the pilots think that he didn't actually know anything about how long refueling took. Throughout the hijacking, D.B. Cooper primarily spoke to Tina Mucklow. In fact, the pilots also never saw Cooper. When looking at the window and out into the Seattle below them, when they were taking flight, the hijacker said, "This looks like Tacoma." When Mucklow asked him a little later, "What do you have against our airline, Northwest Airlines?" Cooper replied, "It's not that I have a grudge against your airline, it's that I have a grudge against all airlines." Around 7 p.m., D.B. Cooper told the pilot to drop under 10,000 feet elevation and under 250 knots, and to depressurize the cabin once they were below that 10,000 feet. He asked Tina Mucklow to read him the instruction manual for opening the aft staircase. And she did this, but she closed the manual for a second and said, "But wait, you can't open the exit door mid-flight." Cooper replied confidently, "Yes, you can." Mucklow wasn't aware that at the time, the Boeing 727 was the only plane with the capability of opening the rear door during flight. Cooper released Mucklow to join the pilots in the cockpit. But before she left, she turned around and said, "Can you please also take that bomb with you?" From the pilot's cabin, they could hear Cooper banging around, struggling. So on the intercom, the pilot asked, "Can we help you with anything?" Dan Cooper shot back with a loud, frustrated "No!" Around 8:13, the pilots saw the red "Open" aft warning, and they noted that they were flying over northern Portland and not very far from Mount St. Helens. Radar indicated it would have been around Cowlitz County. They listened for Cooper, but the back of the plane was actually pretty quiet, save for the soft rumble of air coming from the open exit. They assumed that Cooper must have jumped out of that rear door and into what the newspapers reported at the time as being a stormy night with a temperature of less than 7 degrees Fahrenheit, positively freezing, and that he did this in only a suit and loafers. When they landed in Reno, the cabin, well, it was empty of signs of Cooper. The only thing left in the cabin were 2 parachutes that he'd left behind, a handful of cigarette butts, a couple of fingerprints on an in-flight magazine, and his black JCPenney clip-on tie that he'd thrown on a seat. The ransom note, the money, and Cooper himself were gone without a trace. A newspaper reporter that had been swarming the police as they were sweeping the crew away for questioning had misheard them say the name Dan Cooper as D.B. Cooper, and that name, it stuck in the newspapers. But people all over celebrated that D.B. Cooper had made such a daring escape with corporate money and didn't hurt anyone. They chose to believe that he made it, that he lived with all that money to have a great life, that he was in Mexico somewhere, and he became the stuff of legend. He inspired a very popular T-shirt slogan through the early 1970s. As the Desert Sun newspaper stated, however, a macabre cult is formed in his memory, and they compared him to a latter-day Robin Hood. D.B. Cooper, he's not been found living or dead since the dramatic skyjacking, but the FBI investigated over 1,000 potential suspects. They combed all of the potential drop zone area. Even though it was very cold, they admitted that winters and the forest was very thick, and that made it difficult to do a proper search at the time. Many concluded that he must be dead, gobbled up by wild, winter-starved animals that were living in the national park. Writer Tom Teed wrote that as soon as Cooper jumped, he probably had his shoes ripped from his feet, perhaps his eyes blackened, he had no goggles, by the force of the air under his eyelids, and may have fallen thus incapacitated into a remote area of the foothills, tall trees, and bramble. An FBI agent said Cooper was surely dead at arrival, and his bones may still be hanging from an evergreen in the shadows of the Cascades. And the FBI, they echo that sentiment on their website. We originally thought that Cooper was an experienced jumper, perhaps even a paratrooper, says Special Agent Carr. We concluded after a few years this simply was not true. No experienced parachutist would jump into the pitch black night in the rain with 200-mile-an-hour wind in his face, wearing loafers and a trench coat. It was simply too risky. He also missed that his reserve chute was only for training, had been sewn shut, something a skilled skydiver would have checked. Let's talk updates. Let's talk about those facts that we've learned since Cooper's jump. We'll not be investigating the vast number of suspects, the alleged letters from D.B. Cooper, or all the juicy theories. Not yet. That's for another video. But there's much to unpack with this case. First, let's get to those post-getaway clues. In the spring of 1972, police began an extensive search of Cowlitz County and surrounding areas. In speaking to the locals, they learned that Jess Hatfield, who lived near Ariel, Washington, said he heard a booming thump on his roof the night of the hijacking. And 2 witnesses from neighboring View, Washington, said that they had seen a small plane landing and meeting a car at Hahn Blackberry Farm the night before the hijacking. And the plane then came back the night of the hijacking. The farm owner was actually away at the time at a Pentecostal church wedding, and he claims he had no knowledge of this, and that the air traffic control for the area also said the plane should have been seen on the radar. It would have had to fly really low for them not to catch that. That same year, military webbing, the type found in parachute harnesses, was found in Swift Creek Dam in northern Skamania County, around the Oregon-Washington line, but it couldn't be positively identified. In 1976, a pair of gray trousers were found in a tree in Lake Merwin. Investigators searched the surrounding area and they looked at the pants for clues, but ultimately it was believed that Cooper wasn't even wearing gray trousers at the time of his jump. In 1979, they finally got a verified piece of evidence, a real genuine clue. It was the exit placard from the plane. It was found by hunters in Toutle, Washington area. And then came a big break in the case. In 1980, a boy digging in the sand while his family picnicked at the Columbia River's Tina Bar found a decaying bag of money totaling $5,800. And those bills contained that L serial number, which was D.B. Cooper's ransom stash. At least part of it. Geologists said it landed on the sandbank sometime after 1974, so it's unlikely Cooper buried it after taking it. In 1982, Blake Payne dredged the Columbia River and found a piece of olive drab military parachute. FBI says Cooper's chutes weren't that color. Payne thought it could be maybe the money bag that Cooper tied to his waist, but he never heard back from the FBI in regards to that evidence he submitted. And then we had to wait till 2001. In 2001, the FBI were finally able to get a partial DNA extraction from that JCPenney tie that Cooper left behind. The sample was used to clear a few suspects, but no connection to Cooper has been made from this DNA sample. The cigarette butts, those could have been used, but they got lost in the shuffle, and with those, the possibility of a complete DNA sequence. In 2017, a group dubbing themselves the Citizen Sleuths analyzed that tie for chemicals, and they found many medical particles that you would find in engineering facilities or for transportation workers. There were a lot of steel and aluminum particles on the tie, which led many to speculate about how they got on D.B. Cooper's person. In 2022, the algae on the found ransom money was lab tested, and it was determined that the money did not fall directly into the river. It was on dry land for a number of months before being exposed to water. That could mean the money was later placed there, or that the money landed on dry earth and the river rose up around it, which generally is what happens during spring thaw. The most recent update at the time of this recording was a myth busting done by a Reddit user, DB Case Proficiency. I'm going to link all that. Who pulled out weather records from Seattle and Portland the day of the hijacking to demonstrate that there was no giant storm or sub-zero temperatures, as lore would have it. I've linked that subreddit discussion in most of my source materials for the video in the description box. Please check them out. It's fascinating. Some great calculations and research there. The FBI closed the case on Dan Cooper, But there is hope that his DNA sequence will be released to DNA companies like 23andMe and Ancestry in the future, so users can learn if they're possibly related to the world's most famous hijacker. But fact schmacks out of the way now. In our next History Maven video, we're going to speculate and theorize about D.B. Cooper. I have collected information from the archives, the conspiracy theorists, and I even have a theory straight from my own little peanut brain. So if you will please subscribe so you don't miss that. And do me a favor, show some love in the form of a comment or a thumbs up. This utter crap I've made takes an embarrassing amount of time to compose, so please throw me a pity like or a little pat on the head. But in all seriousness, I hope you got something out of today's video. You being here until the bitter end means the world to me. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, my friend. And as always, I wish you peace and love. Maven out.